Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so first I wanted to start off on reflecting on the why. And in particular, why did you want to attend graduate school? Or you can answer, why did you choose your graduate program? So in thinking about, how we're first gonna address dealing with this rejection, why did we want to go in the first place? Sometimes when grad school gets hard, I ask myself, why did I choose to pursue this doctorate in neuroscience? So anyone can unmute and respond.
Okay. Well, my why was I think like many others, like I know I really enjoyed science and when I was in college, I didn't necessarily knew where I was going with that, but I was like, you know what, I like science, so let me just stick in that field and figure it out as I go. And it wasn't until I got into a research lab in my undergrad that I realized I really enjoyed, probing why, things are happening. I really was invested in learning why the body works a certain way, especially because I'm more in the microimmunology field. Like, why is it this bacteria is able to overcome our immune cells? And then I knew I really wanted to focus on that. And that then ended up leading to me wanting to go to graduate school because that's exactly what you do. You're asking those why questions and really investigating in depth and finding new knowledge. And I thought that's what's really intrigued me about graduate school, which is then what led to my all my crazy applications.
Um, yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of the same sentiments, just knowing the why of things. I never particularly saw myself as a medical person. Um, it felt to me like it would be very stressful in college to go that route. But this is before I even knew anything about science. So when I had my first research position, I realized that like, oh, there's people that are curious about things and they get paid to do those things. Um, then as my college career went on, and I was fortunate enough to join the MARC program, which I it's basically it used to be called Minority Access to Research Careers. They changed the name recently, but essentially that program kind of taught me like how rare populations like mine and others are in academia or research in general. And from then on, I kind of saw it as like a I don't know like a challenge to be in these spaces. Um, while also enjoying, doing science. Um, it's kind of my way of like, I don't know, doing something about how helpless it may all feel in society. It's like making this experience easier for you guys.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of merging both of their responses. Yeah, I was actually pre-med. And then I joined my first neuroscience research lab, and that's when it clicked that I actually preferred investigating really the mechanisms that arise that of why diseases arise instead of wanting to treat them. But still for me, that pull of like initially why I wanted to become a like a medical doctor was that I could merge my love for science and supporting my community. And so when I realized I preferred the science or not the science, but the research questions, I struggled to make that switch because I still couldn't see how I could keep supporting my communities in that space. But as I continued through research, I realized really how rare it is for a lot of people from our communities to be in these spaces in academia. So that then kind of remotivated me and made helped me make that full commitment to a PhD and help continue opening more doors for others to follow in this path. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Because I mean, I also, so one thing about it, when I was going on interviews, I noticed that a lot of programs didn't have a lot of visible diversity. And that was concerning for me because it's hard to be in a new location, a new environment, and not see anyone that looks like you other than, the cleaning staff. And for me, it was really important that I, go to a program where I know I'm going to be supported, but also I know that there are people there who, look like me, are also of different cultural backgrounds and are also first generation. That's super important because I feel like we have our own unique, struggles. And to me, it's amazing that, there are certain programs here who really make it a point to support all students, especially students coming from minoritized backgrounds. So I always remember that, and I'm grateful that I am in a good program because, not everyone has that experience. So I want you guys to, focus on your why. Why did you apply in the first place? But now also consider, there are some short-term actions that you can do after receiving a rejection. So with that, do you guys have advice for ways prospective students can maybe receive feedback on their applications? Do you guys recommend like emailing professors, or how would you go about getting feedback?
Well, at least for me, when I was applying for grad schools, I tended to be in contact with the program, like a director or like administrator. So when just because I usually tended to ask them questions while I was doing my application process. So I know during one of the rounds that I got rejected, I ended up reaching out to those people and asking them if they could take like a few minutes of their time just to like go over because they can't go over, I think, specifics about your application, and not all of them will, have the time to sit down. But even if just one person gets back to you, I think that's still useful. And it's still, if you're still planning to reapply, it's still good to know, like, they also know that you're very interested and you want to improve your application. So I think I at least got one response back, and they sat down with me for like, I think 30 minutes, and they just kind of talked about the general um things that maybe that you could just improve on in general. But I think that's one tactic that you could do if you were at least communicating with the program directors.
Um, I think so. The first round when I applied and didn't get in, I didn't reach out to necessarily people. But what now as like a fourth year grad student, I feel like I some people that you could maybe reach out to would be either grad students in the programs that you were interested in and having them maybe look over your application just because they've gone through the process themselves. Maybe some of them have sat on admissions committees by then. So they could also be a good resource in case like faculty aren't responding. So I think that could be another great option.
I think being comfortable with like getting feedback, the reality is that a lot of times, especially as we go through our career, we kind of don't give ourselves enough time to get feedback because sometimes feedback hurts. It's hard not to take it personally, but it is ultimately very productive when you ask the right people. Um, and I think in cases where, um, in my own grant rejections and like students that I've mentored that have not gone on to grad school on their first try, usually because we waited too long to share the first draft or the second draft, and kind of left it, a little too close to the deadline. And so by that I mean that like you might think that having the first draft is great if you finish a week early, but a week is usually not enough for people to give you feedback and for you to integrate it in a reasonable way without like rushing it. And so, and I know it's not easy to finish these sorts of statements early. Um, but the first statement doesn't have to be that good, really. Ultimately, people are going to tell you what to fix. And if you give them enough time for them to tell you that, then your statements are going to improve dramatically. There might be things you kind of even forgot to highlight or even mention, that you might not have realized unless somebody told me, like, hey, maybe you should have highlighted how the position you got was actually through a competitive process and that multiple people were interviewed. Things that you might not think are actually very impressive. Um, Yeah, so getting feedback a lot earlier and letting people give you feedback with enough time.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I want to echo what you said because I think feedback and I mean, you're going to go through a lot of drafts for your applications, and you definitely want to get feedback from a lot of peers, maybe people who are graduate students, because they tend to have more time and they can help you. But ask the people who are going to be your letter writers as well. I mean, they tend to they want you to get to grad school, so they'll be more than happy. And like you said, Christian, that you just give them enough time to get feedback. Like you're going to be doing lots of edits, so I think. Yeah, you're gonna get feedback on your applications early. I definitely went through a lot of edits for mine.
Right. Thank you guys for that. One more thing I want to say about that is just, don't be sad if people don't respond to you, because oftentimes PIs tend to be busy, and sometimes they aren't as responsive to emails, if you're asking for feedback. But definitely talk to the people in your circle if you have, mentors, other graduate students around you. Definitely try to reach out to different sources and have somebody read your application and, see how they can either give you feedback for improving or, point out something that you might have missed. So it's always good to have more than one perspective. Um, Speaking of which, how can prospective students improve their applications if they choose to reapply to the same graduate program?
Uh, really, really emphasize what you did different or what you did in the time since you last applied. Um, it's very effective for you to make the case to people that you're committed to how long, I suppose, an artist, a PhD can be by showing that even when you didn't have to, you took initiative to gain more research experience, for example. Um, and I think being very open about that, be like straight up saying that, like, oh, despite rejections in my first round, I knew that this is something I wanted to do. So I took it upon myself to seek this research position. And through it, I actually learned a lot of things like new techniques, new opportunities to present, or a little more independence in your projects. And through that, you cemented that decision because you knew that the skills you were learning in that time period were actually going to be very beneficial to you having developed a maturity and sort of the readiness to go to grad school this round that maybe you didn't know you needed. Um, I think that sort of honesty can actually be very effective and definitely sets apart from people who the admissions committee might consider sort of like a risk, like people who are coming straight from undergrad, of compared to somebody that's like, we have proof right here that when things go wrong, which they will go wrong in science and academia and research, they'll kind of push through to their own self-improvement.
Um, I think something that can be very powerful too is I don't know what stage everyone's at, but if you applied the first time after or during undergrad, a lot of the times you haven't had full-time research experience, so an additional year of the real full-time research is very beneficial and it gives you more access to gain a lot more independence in your research projects. So I definitely advise that. And another thing is learning how to maybe improve how you talk about your projects. A lot of times when I'm sitting on admissions committees, I'm seeing that there are some students who focus on techniques, whereas there's others that focus on the questions that they're asking, the results that they found, what those results mean, and those are the people that we're seeing as those are the applications that are kind of moving forward. So I feel like learning really to focus on their questions when you're applying in your essays, that is uh, a really good thing to do when you're reapplying.
Yes, science communication is so important. And I feel like sometimes, it's hard to understand that, especially when you're, when you make it to the interview point. and they're asking you to talk about their research, a lot of times your research is not necessarily going to be in the same field as someone who's interviewing you. So when you're just throwing jargon and techniques at them, it's not effective. You really want to show that, you thought through the project, even if it's a research class, a research course you took. You want to make sure that, you're clear on, what was the research question, what were your hypotheses, and how did these experiments, what were the results, and what would you do next. And so I remember being on my interview and my second round after having practice and practice, how to articulate these things. And I had such great interviews after that, because practicing talking about, the science and my passion for science, I was able to really, express, how much I was committed to going to graduate school and to research. So science communication is super important. So always think about, how you're talking about your research in a way that you should be able to, somebody else who's not directly in your field should be able to read your application and completely understand what you're talking about. Yeah. So, Jacqueline, did you want to say something?
I mean, just kind of everyone has said, just really, I think something that I had trouble with, at least maybe when I was more an undergrad when I applied the first time, is really emphasizing what you contributed to, or like really talking yourself up. I think sometimes it could be hard to do, or you're not used to doing that sort of writing, especially for your personal statements. So I think that's something, or at least that I struggled with, is like, look at all this work I did. Like maybe I said it briefly, but like you should really emphasize it because that's amazing. Like you've done amazing things, and you should really tell the committee like all the great things that you've done. And I think you should really emphasize that. And I think, like I said, I think people tend to struggle on that portion. Um, and yeah, just what everyone else had said too, but mainly that.
If
Kind of random.
oh, oh,
Sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah.
You do it.
No, you're good. Okay. I
Um,
just wanted to add really quickly to what Jacqueline said, that that is, I think, the benefit of having other people read your essays, your especially your personal statement before, because and people that know you, because then they could read it and then be like, oh my goodness, you haven't even talked yourself up. Anyway, like yeah, you need to mention this and that, mention, and so yes, that's where I think sending your personal statements to other people, because that is very hard, I think, for a lot of people to like write and talk themselves up. But yeah.
and if you ever train somebody, mention that because it shows that you're like not only mastering skills, but you're like gaining mentorship experience in the lab.
Or troubleshooting, like if you spent like most, if you feel like you maybe don't have enough data, but like because you spent so much time troubleshooting, that is also something you could definitely talk about in your essay. And that is something that is you being a scientist. You're troubleshooting these issues and you're learning as you go. So yeah.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so moving on to some more long-term actions. Are there specific types of research, experiences, fellowships, or jobs that can significantly boost a future application? And of course, the answer is yes. But I'm gonna open this for, for you guys to talk a little bit about your postbacks, and for Jacqueline, working as a medical research technician. Okay, yeah. So I'll let you guys talk about your experience there. Yeah.
Well, I guess you know that we're all gonna say we all did a post back, so I think that helped us immensely. Or at least I know when I was doing my post-bac program, I did do research as an undergrad, but when I was an undergrad, I was similarly to Maribel. I was like a pre-med, because usually when you think of science, you tend to be, oh, pre-med, because that's, at least for me, that was the first thing that I think about. And then I learned I liked research later on. But the research that I did in my undergrad was more ecology work, because I just kind of got into a lab randomly. So a post-bac really helped me to re orientate myself to like the research type that I would be interested in microbiology, immunology. So I thought a postbac was really useful because you really got to immerse yourself in the research. Because while as an undergrad, you kind of do research on the side or part-time. You're not really fully immersed in it until you're fully immersed in it. And there's a big difference. And I think a post-bac program, my program was great, and you really are doing research like that's your main job. You're doing that 90% of the time with the little classes here and there, and you feel like a graduate student. So it also gives you a taste of what you're getting yourself into. So I think post-bac programs were great. But on the side, I'll let everyone else talk about that too. But besides that, I also had applied to graduate schools right after I graduated. So I graduated in 2020 with my bachelor's degree. So that was a hectic time for work and just applying for grad school. But so I ended up applying for grad schools. I didn't get in that round. So I knew I wanted to get some experience, some work experience. So that's when I worked as a technician. And that was a really good experience for me because I was working with human samples and I was processing things, but you're just kind of going through assays and just reading the results. I thought that was a really good experience to be like, I really enjoyed what I did, but I that also showed me that I want to get more into the research. Like here I am just showing like providing results for the physicians, but I want to go into more into the why. So I think that helped with my applications because I had a little bit of clinical experience doing those assays. And then it also just showed them that I had that taste, but I want to know more. So at least that my job experience helped me with that. And that I think helped my applications.
I could talk about my post-bac program. So I think, yeah, there's various different ones, and the one I applied to and got in was a prep at UC Davis. And so prep is a post-baccalaureate program that I think so it's funded by the NIH, but then they are at different institutions. You can look up on through the NIH. Oh, well, I don't know if you can look it up, but um, at least I'll talk about the one at Davis. So that was a great one. It's a 1 year program. That's the other thing. Some are 1 year, some are 2 years. I wanted a 1 year program. And what I really liked about the Davis one was that there was 75% research, and then the rest of the time was kind of professional development classes. We were given access to take classes fall and winter, no, actually all quarters. So that helped because I also didn't have a great GPA. So that helped, for me when I applied again. Um, I took graduate level courses at Davis, so I was able to show, hey, I know my GPA is not great, but look, I was able to be successful in graduate level courses, and here's the proof. So that helped me talk about that. And then the other strong thing, when you're maybe looking for post-bac programs, is that I really liked about the one at Davis is that they actually have us take a class where we are writing and preparing our application for the NSF GRFP. And so that class is just literally meant for that. We are all talking as a group, passing our essays around to share and to edit, um, and then we all apply to the NSF GRP, and that is 100% the reason I got it. Because without, I didn't even know what NSF GRP was before grad school, which is essentially external funding that then, if you get it, you get 3 years of funding for you and your research project. So that fellowship goes to you and not the institution. Well, it goes to the institution, but they're funding you. And so, yeah, I really got a lot out of that, having that funding before grad school. So it gave me a lot of power once I got into grad school and the type of labs I joined, because I was bringing that funding with me.
I think whatever you do, if it can be tied to research in some way, is good. Um, like even clinical um, jobs. I think I've seen people be successful in sort of like pivoting from industry as well after graduation, being like, oh, I was a bench technician for this company, and very similar to what Jacqueline says. Like I kind of wanted, to be involved more in the decision-making process and the finding out, and not just doing things. Um, there's lab technician positions. Yeah, any institution, you're just gonna have to be very open about what you do with that year. If I'm being honest, like there's there are prep programs like Maribel mentioned. I was part of one of those. So those can be like, your ideal, like, oh, that'd be great because I get paid, there's support. Um, but in cases where well, for one, in cases where that funding might not be available, um, people are still going to need the, to do the things that those positions filled. And so that might be lay more in the hands of labs. And not to be like, I'm gonna be very realistic with you. Like a lot of labs, unfortunately, do not have the money to hire post-baccalaureate researchers. But that's not your problem. You know what I mean? At this stage of your career, you just want to get hired so you can get some sort of experience. And what I kind of recommend is start looking into labs at your institution or nearby institutions that have sources of money that are not federal, because most of the time that money is like a lot more unrestricted, which allows PIs to kind of just hire a little more liberally on a year-to-year basis. So by that I mean, here's an example. If there's a lab around you that has a GSMI investigator or something like that, I would consider seeing whether or not you can apply into a position in that lab or just ask if they have an opening. Because if you guys are not super aware, right, like HMI investigator, it's like not federal funding, but it's a ton of money, and unfortunately, it's also very causes a lot of disparity in the types of research that labs can do. But nonetheless, again, that is at this point you just need to get a job um, in some capacity. And the other great part is that getting paid through those types of funds is like, I suppose, sabotage, less open to sabotage, I suppose, through government interference. And that's something that I'm actually like learning a lot more of too. Um, there's also foundation grants. So if there's a PI that that's funded by the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative or the Simons Foundation, basically, I feel like we're going back to like the times when artists were funded by like rich people, but like for science, if that makes any sense. But I hope this is all temporary, right? But I would be lying to you if I didn't particularly think that like at least prep programs won't at least go through some rebranding in this cycle. And you guys are kind of going through like a very uncharted territory, kind of like how COVID was for a lot of us, and also for you, obviously, when you were in like undergrad and high school. Um, to think about alternatives, like prep programs are awesome, but think about alternatives that don't depend on government funding, at least for this cycle.
Yeah, I just want to say that like whatever you end up doing, as long as you emphasize on your applications how that gave you some sort of insight on why, or like what did this experience show you and how can that be applied to your grad school experience. And at the end of the day, they just want to see that whatever experience you have, you can now apply it to grad school. And a lot of things in grad school is just learning how to reapply the skills that you already know, and that will just help you with your future endeavors. So as long as you kind of show that and just say that, doesn't matter what you do, I think that will just eventually help you with your application because they show that you're thinking about what you're doing. You can apply your new skills to whatever. And I think that really helps for your applications.
Agreed. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for that. Okay. Um, how do applicants strategically choose which programs to apply to in the next cycle to maximize their chances of success?
Mm, so, uh, well, I'm the type of person that just applies to everything because I just like I just throw a bunch of stuff out there. Um, but kind of what Christian was saying that I think it is a good idea right now in today's time to reach out and diversify like the type programs you're applying to because I think prep programs are great, but yes, like we don't know the state of where that's going to be. I'm going to put this link here for the Davis prep one because their deadline to apply is the 17th of February. So if you guys want to apply to that, and feel free to email me any questions.
Yeah. When I reapplied to graduate school, I thrive off of pettiness sometimes. So I actually reapplied to the same school that rejected me. And in my letter, I was like, though I was waitlisted here, I spent a year, doing independent research. I really worked on my science communication, and I was accepted after that. And I politely told them, no, actually, I'm actually going to go somewhere else, but thanks. So if you want to, you can reapply to the program that rejected you. To me, it's actually a good look. It says a lot about, your your what's the word I'm looking, your commitment. Yes, your commitment to that program. But also you already have kind of like an insight to that program. If you were, emailing professors or if you spoke to any grad students, you already have a little bit of insight into that program. So it could be useful for when you go to reapply. But in addition to that, I also went from one school that I applied to now the second round, I applied to 12 different schools and I chose different locations. I chose the school that I also did a post back on because, I was like, I love the environment there. I had friends there and things like that. But then I also chose a university that was closer to my hometown. So I diversified the programs that I was interested in a lot in the second round. So that could be another way to maximize your success by diversifying, where you choose to apply.
Yeah, I was gonna say I also did that. I think the round that I got ended up getting accepted into my program. I I think I applied to like 11 programs, different program, and that's kind of the strategy. I think it's kind of that's usually around the range people tend to apply to, like 10-ish, or at least that I've heard of. And because from that, I also diversified it. So I did like my dream schools that I feel like it's more of a reach for me. And then I did like schools that I think would be like right around my based off their program, like their website, like where I think I would fit in the most and what I really wanted to do. And then I did programs that you think that oh, I think I could get in these for sure. That way, I think that's the way I was told to like kind of diversify my application. But at the end of the day, it's all these applications could also just be very random. Like the schools that you think of that you'll get in for sure, like they'll just reject you because that sometimes they do that and it's just how it is. But that's you never know. Like the dream school that you wanted to go to, they give you interviews. Like it's good just to diversify, kind of how you were saying, the schools you go to and the numbers. I think 10 is a good amount of numbers, to maximize the potential of you getting into one of the programs.
So sorry, I misinterpreted the question. I thought programs was in post-bac programs, not grad programs. But yes, I also did increase my number of schools that I applied to my next cycle. Umbrella programs are really good. At least I did a mix of umbrella programs and neuroscience programs. Um, I didn't want to do psych because I like that most neuroscience programs do rotations and more. I think psych programs are you're reaching out to a PI directly and you're joining their lab automatically. So yeah.
I think an effective strategy has been to apply to umbrella programs. So if you're interested in neuro, there's biomedical programs, there's biology programs. Like Maribel said, psychology programs might function without rotations, but you still can do neuroscience research. Some schools basically are set up so that it doesn't matter what department you're in, you can always affiliate professors with whatever topic they research with your program. And so like for example, I was in a neuroscience program, but I did my PhD in the psychology department. Um, I've seen people basically like, and this depends on the institution. So this is UCSD. Um, People doing like their PhD with a lab that studied like urine behaviors in the peripheral nervous system or through the peripheral nervous system. And they were still in the neurosciences grad program because they made a case as to why that's relevant for neuroscience. Um, it really doesn't cost anything for a program to affiliate a faculty. Most of the time, they don't even know who the new faculty are because they're in such different like departments and areas of the university. So most of the time, they're like, "Yeah, sure, here, fill this petition, and we'll see if they get approved." Um, so basically, apply to multiple programs that fail vaguely under the definition of the things you want to do, because you can always, once you get in, steer your research towards what you want to do, or in the general area of what you want to do.
Yeah, I don't know if I know some schools limit you to one application per program, but there I got Davis, I was able to apply to two different programs. So I applied to neuroscience and applied to a more umbrella general one. And so maybe that's something you could also look into. Like, if there's a school that you really like and a professor that you really like, a lot of times they're in both programs. So, and if you're able to apply to more than one, I think that's also a good option.
Thank you guys for that. Okay. Um, Next up, imposter syndrome. I always think it's always important to talk about, imposter syndrome and making sure that we're keeping our self-doubt in check. Because rejection is hard. It's a very hard thing to deal with, and sometimes it can be hurtful, but that is not a reflection of you or how smart and talented you are. And so with that, what are practical ways to build a support system, mentors, peers, online communities that can help combat imposter syndrome?
I kind of think this goes back to the programs that I eventually ended up here. So at Duke, we have the reason why I picked Duke at the end of the day is because I felt like they had such a good student community. When I came to visit during my visitation weekend, they have BioCore programs specifically that I ended up applying to that I'm also a scholar here. But it's like a community of students that you apply, and it's a first year and it's spread around different programs so that you met people from different programs. And that was a way to like also diversify my friends around here. I meet people from different programs, and then I have my cohort of all the students that also got in the same year as me. So we really bonded together because, we're all at the same stage. So we really rely on each other or just like talk about what we're going through. So it's just we're all at the same level, I guess. And then there's also lots of clubs here. Like I'm also part of the SACNAS club here at Duke here. And it's more Latino. So it's nice to also just be around people who are similar background as me and talk about like our struggles coming here. So you just really have to, I think your first year in graduate school is the perfect time because you're kind of going through rotations to try to find a lot of friends, go to different events and try to find your people and just be very open about like the struggles that you're going through because chances are a lot of people are going through the same struggles and I feel like that usually helps me combat my like imposter syndrome. I'm just like, oh, I feel like I'm struggling on this. I don't know what I'm doing. And someone's like, me too. And I was like, okay, great. It's not just me. More people are struggling. So it makes me feel like I'm not alone. So I think that has been helping me.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I'm also a member of the Alliance for Diversity in Science and Engineering here at the U of R. And, it's really nice to talk to people who are going through the same things as you or similar things. And so my suggestion would be one, reach out to the people who helped you during your application cycle. So if you had any professors that, submitted letters of recommendation on your behalf, reach out to them and say, hey, I was rejected from this program that I really, really was interested in. Can I sit down with you and chat? And I'm sure they're going to be able to support you and also provide you with some advice and also remind you that, you are smart and talented and more than deserving of being there. And with a few tweaks to your application, you could be successful in the next round. So it is important to just, always reach out and talk to people who may have had similar experiences. Yeah. Okay, so reapplying can feel like a long journey. How can applicants stay motivated and keep self-doubt in check along the way?
I feel like this goes along with like the previous question, which is really the importance of your community. And so reaching out to them. Um, Científico Latino is a great community in that sense that they have webinars like these. They also have the GSMI mentorship program, which I think is another great option that you can look into because I also pair you with a mentor. And yeah, but I think also just overall being not so hard on yourself because this is really a difficult process and it's there's going to be moments where it's tough, but checking in with yourself and taking breaks and yeah, just not being too hard on yourself, I think can go a long way.
I think what's helped me is the fact that it's not going to be the first time that you're going to experience rejection in your career. And you do build thicker skin for it. I'm not saying imposter syndrome ever goes away, because I don't think it does. Like, you can ask Nobel laureates and they'll be like, I don't know why I got the prize. Um, but it does get easier to deal with the emotions that come about from a rejection. Like, for example, working on a paper revision right now that I think I've learned my best system is to open the reviews and be really, really angry for 24 hours. And I let myself be as sad and as angry as I ever can be. And then recognize that by kind of just accepting those emotions as like normal and healthy, and understandable to have, I kind of move on quicker from because I don't resist them. And I'm like, okay, well, now that I got that out of my system, like what do I need to do to actually address these reviewers? Um, so I think my motivation to keep going comes a lot from not resisting and more of accepting the negative emotions that come with rejection and understanding that they're natural and they're not ever really like it's not human to ever expect to not feel self-doubt. Um, and so kind of embracing that.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say that was beautiful. I definitely also say definitely embrace your emotions. Like it's normal. Like like you were saying, rejection is kind of comes with the territory. Like down the line, your ideas never work out. There's gonna be a lot of rejection. So I definitely say, and like we talked about, your support system, I think is key. Like I think that's what helped me and remembering your why. You're like, I really want to do this. I know I could do this, and now I just need to show them that I could do this, whether that's just doing more research experience and just making my application better. But I think, yeah, just believe in yourself. I know that sounds easier or maybe more kind of hand wavy, but I think, yeah, like if you really know you could do this, and I know you guys could do this, so you guys are going through the applications, like you could do it. I know you guys can.
Yeah, and I like to add really quickly, like try to take initiative in asking mentors or people you feel comfortable, like what like what have their experiences dealing with rejections. I think it was very liberating for me to hear from my current PI about their experiences navigating the postdoc and realizing that like this extremely successful person had a lot of the same emotions and feelings and sort of like the thought that things are so unfair that in the bigger picture and with the passage of time, they realize are like, oh, this was actually like a good thing. If this rejection hadn't happened, I would not have been able to go in this research direction, or I would never have taken on this student, or I would never have like applied to this grant. And understanding that like it, it just honestly makes you better. Um, Much like science too, troubleshooting science just makes you better, not more knowledgeable on what not to do.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay. Um, so that completes the questions that we have. Now I'm going to open the Q&A. Please, you guys, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A, and we'll answer live. So the first question that I see here, is what if this is my reapplication and I'm not willing to reapply? So I'm assuming this means that you went through more than one cycle of rejection for graduate school applications, and you're not wanting to apply again. If we have any advice for that. Um, Me personally, I would consider what it is you want to do in life. Because for me, I got to a point where I was like, I want to do research and I want to develop the ability to think like a researcher and ask good questions. And because of that, that's been my main motivation for staying in grad school after I got in, because, it's not easy. Things do get hard. But at the end of the day, I knew I wanted to be an independent scientist. In that capacity. So, maybe it could be considering master's programs or considering, maybe working for industry for a little bit, and then reassessing if you need to go to graduate school, if you need the doctorate. That would be my advice. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yes. Or actually, just echo. I tell my students, ask yourself, do you actually need a PhD for what you want to do in your life? Or are you just kind of going through the motions of, being an academic overachiever, as sometimes we tend to do? And a lot of times through that conversation, they'll be like, "Oh, I guess not really." Um, but sometimes the people do realize, yeah, actually, I do need one because I want to like be a leader in research, like right off the bat, and not like have to climb through the ranks of a company to get there. Um, I think there are many things that in science that you can do that are as equally fulfilling as academic research in other sectors. And so it is a unique experience, but it's not like, I don't know, the outcome is not unique, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. There's another question. I study environmental biology. I had a low cumulative GPA in my undergraduate. I have a higher cumulative GPA in my master's, but I was rejected for a PhD program. What should I do? How can I strengthen my next application?
I think that just kind of goes back to what we were talking about because also had a low GPA in my undergrad, actually, and then when I did my prep program, I was able to then get my GPA up and just show that, have the capability of getting a higher GPA on the programs or the classes I did. But I think this just goes down to your statements. You really need to emphasize, you know, maybe this will help, but like you just need to emphasize. I think you might need to touch on why you had a low GPA. They want to know. Some even interviewers will ask you. I had a couple interviewers like go through my transcript and be like, you had this grade. Why did you have that grade? Or, but if you have a reasonable explanation on why you had a low GPA, just going through a tough time, just be honest about it. I think someone had mentioned before, but the applications tend to be holistic. And your GPA may not be what's holding you back at the end of the day. Maybe you just really need to emphasize what you learned during your master's and how that could translate to your graduate school program. Um, so I think that might be helpful for your next applications.
I think one thing that I'd like to add to that is that I always did better in my lab classes than I did in general lectures. And so I use that to tie into my story of like why I'm passionate about research and bench work and using my hands. I'd like to blame it on my ADHD brain, but I was never good in the lecture portions, but in the lab portions, things just clicked when I can, physically do things with my hands and figure out from like, oh, like that didn't work, why didn't that work? And then troubleshoot. So I always thrived, I always had higher grades in my lab classes than I did in the regular classes. And with that, I wrote about that in my personal statement and I reframed that to say, like, this is a part of the reason why I belong in graduate school because, in my heart, like I am a researcher. In my heart, like I'm someone who thrives based on like experiments and learning hands-on and researching and just asking good questions. And so with that, I mean, I feel like there's always a way to spin a low GPA. And also, we have to divest from thinking that the GPA is the end of the world because there are a lot of programs, like for example, my program, you don't put your GPA on your application at all. You do send transcripts, so I mean, do they look at it? I don't know. But some programs will have you put your GPA like directly on the application, and this one doesn't. There are other programs that do that as well. I believe OHSU does that as well. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But long story short, your GPA is not the end all be all. There are people who have had very, very low GPAs, but have gone on to be super successful in graduate school. There's actually a study about this, I believe, that shows that like the GPA and the GRE are not great predictors of how good you're going to do in graduate school. So um, I would have someone give a second opinion on your application as a whole and focus on, maybe other ways for you to market yourself, whether it's, maybe working on science communication and how you're talking about the research and communicating that. Also like, what other important things you're doing as well in your personal statement. So I would focus more on that rather than getting caught up with the GPA would be my advice. Okay. The last question I see here. Oh, we're all done. Okay. Does anyone have anything else? No?
Someone asked, sorry, before I hit send, that if there are any resources for like science communication, um, or to improve that, I believe I sent the link that I'm going to send to the actual chat. Um, this is a very boring, dry page, but it'll explain something very important about science communication that a lot of people just don't do well. And that is like a clear like order of how to talk about ideas and how to talk about things you want to do in your research. Um, this this page basically changed my career, I think, to be honest. Even though it looks like so short and so dry, because it finally made sense, like what people mean by what are your specific aims, what are your objectives, what is your hypothesis, um, in ways that people don't really do well sometimes in explaining.
Well, just kind of to emphasize, if you're an undergrad or like you're in currently in your university, there's usually programs that help with these sort of things. Like their whole mission is to go out to the general public or, and just talk about research. So you can always participate in those. I tended to always do those because I think science communication is, very important. And it's also it's important for the public to understand what we're doing. But it's also important for you to know how to simplify your work to a wider range of audience. So like we would do talks from like elementary school kids to just like older members of the community who just want to learn about science. But there's usually some sort of clubs, and if not, you can make up your own. I know some schools tend to have like a science on tap where they'll just go to like the local bar and they have like three speakers talk about what their current research is, or you could just make that with your friends. You guys meet up, and like, that experience is what's going to help with that at the end of the day.
you you could also start by just practicing with like your friends and your family. Like for me, that was such a big help is like learning how to talk about my science to different people with different educational backgrounds. And a lot of times it's just your friends and your family that are right there and uh, down to listen to you talk.
I want to echo that. Has anyone ever tried explaining their project in Spanish? Oh my God, that that is hard, okay? Props to you guys. I can't do it. But I just want to echo like talking to your friends and family because again, as I mentioned, I'm first generation and it took a couple years before my mom stopped telling people that I was in medical school, and I was like, I'm actually in graduate school. Sorry to break your heart. Um, but even with that, I had to learn about how to talk about my research in a way that didn't get super like down into the details and like would lose her. Like I would watch her eyes glaze over and I was like, okay, I want you to see why this is exciting for me. So I had to think about like analogies and ways to like compare some of the concepts I was working with to, things in their everyday lives. And again, depending on your audience, the way you talk about your project is going to change. And so it's nice to be able to practice like even with children, like explaining your project, that's how you know you really understand your project. If you're able to like communicate to a 10-year-old child like what you're doing and the grand scheme of things and how it fits into stuff and how like well they'll see you as like, changing the world. But to be able to convey that to just like your family or like a child, really good practice. And really helps you like figure out what you don't understand about your project to be able to like then go back and ask more questions to your PI or your research mentor, and then try again. So I would just say just practice and talk to as many people as you can. The U of R does something called Thinkers and Drinkers, which is similar to what Jacqueline mentioned, where they go out into the community at bars and they talk about their research, and that's fun. Maybe you can look up in your area to see if there's something similar that goes on, um, and practice talking to people. That would be my advice. And with that, I would just like to thank everyone so much for their time. Um, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this webinar. As always, if any of the attendees have any questions, feel free to email us and contact us. And best of luck. Remember, a rejection is not the end of things. Um, Reapply, but also, consider if this is the path for you, there are other options. With that being said, everyone enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you guys again for joining us.